We just heard from Jason this wonderful message of why that we do this. Why are we caring for vulnerable families? This gospel-oriented message to do that. And we've heard about the issues. We've heard about how they play out in West Virginia. Now we're going to make a hard switch and start talking about how. So the folks that we have with us today on this panel, this is really a best practices panel. We are so privileged. I look across this panel, and everyone here has played a role in getting us to today, a major role. And we've learned so much from them. To introduce the panel, you've heard from Lynn and Jason this morning, and they've already been introduced. But we have two members of this panel who have yet to be introduced. To my immediate left here is Andy Cook, my friend Andy Cook. Andy's the CEO and president of Promise 686. It's actually their video. It's a Promise 686 video that we just watched. And as a reminder, Promise 686 is an Atlanta-based nonprofit, and they have a mission to mobilize church communities. So that's what they're doing today, being here with us. And they carry out this mission by equipping churches to care for adopted, vulnerable, local, and foster families. So Andy began his leadership of Promise 686 in 2013 after serving as a founding board member of Promise 686. So he's been there since the beginning. Prior to Promise, he served as the Director of Development and Director of Admissions at Wesleyan School, a K-12 independent Christian school. He has a BA in English, an MA in Religion, and this is the thing that impresses me the most, that he and his wife Martha have 10 children that they've adopted and have adopted both domestically and internationally. The picture we saw of Jason up here, and now knowing Andy has 10 children, we have so many children represented here today, just in your own families. We also have Lesli Reece with us at my far left. Lesli is with North Point Ministries and runs their Fostering Together ministry. She's the ministry director of Fostering Together, which was established in 2011 and has grown from 22 families to more than 400 families currently participating across 8 campuses in Metro Atlanta. You have your work cut out for you, goodness. So I want to just jump into some questions, and we're going to bounce around a little bit up here instead of going straight down the line. But Andy, I'm going to start with you. All right, so we are going to go there. So your organization, you train and support ministries and churches throughout the nation to care for vulnerable children and families. We are just now getting to the portion of the day of talking about how. So can you orient us just a bit on the types of activities that churches can do to impact children and families, and maybe give us some common understanding of just some of the basic concepts?
Absolutely, and thanks for allowing me the chance to just share for a second. I'm so encouraged that to be a silent partner in the work that's happening in West Virginia. I'm not silent right now, but we just want to come behind and with Chestnut Mountain Village and to support them, so this is a privilege, so thank you. To answer your question, there's really 3 categories of relief or need response that a family advocacy ministry can do. It's real simple, and I want to speak to everyone in the room as pastors or as people who know pastors. And I want you to grab some of this language, and I'm going to ask you to take what you're going to hear and then to say, who can I relay this message to? So the 3 categories of activities within a fam. First is meeting physical needs. It's that crib, it's that baby formula. It's the simplicity of something that could be transactional, but carries weight because the person bringing it has hope of what can come of that person's life they're interacting with. That's that physical need. The second is relational. It's wrapping around and staying with. And that sort of activity a church can do, and they typically sign up to be with the family for the sake of those children for 12, 13, 14 months at minimum. So you go from a one-time and meeting a physical need to a longer term and relational. And then the last category is familial. It is those needs or the child's need for family. And sometimes we'll have folks in our congregations who can step up and foster or adopt. So think in terms of those 3 categories of responses or activities that a church can do. But in addition to that, if you can do it in your mind, flip it, and let's do a matrix across this, because there's a number of groups that can be served. The basic premise here is that the best way to serve children is to invest in their families. So we've talked today about biological families. We've talked about what are considered kinship families. Then there was a term that surfaced earlier from this couch, fictive kin. So people who are like the next of kin, already in an existing relationship with the child. Then there are foster families. Then there are adoptive families. And all of those families, in an effort to assist children, need physical needs met, relational needs met, and at times those children will need those familial needs. So how's that?
That's wonderful. Thank you. Great way to get us started. So Jason, you actually wrote a field guide, which some of the people in the room have now, about very practical ways that churches can care for foster, adoptive, and kinship families. The title of it is Everyone Can Do Something. Can you just explain that concept a little bit as people are taking the book home and getting ready to read it?
Yeah. The idea is not new. It's actually, we believe, rooted in Scripture, and it's built around the description of how the body of Christ interacts and relates with itself. Primarily, the picture given to us in Scripture is a physical body. Some are ears, some are eyes, some are hands, some are feet. And so we might say of that we're not all called to do the same things, but we're all capable of doing something, and everyone can do something. And that something is going to look different. To really optimize the effectiveness of how the body of Christ operates, we need ears to be the best ears that they can be, and so that eyes can be the best eyes they can be, so that hands can do the unique things that hands have been created to do, and so on down the line. And so just building off of what Andy said, just kind of, we use some language in the book, this idea of just kind of providing tiered opportunities for people to engage. Some of them are going to be a little lower hanging fruit, a little easier to do, not less significant. Simple doesn't mean less significant. Sometimes the most simple things are some of the most significant things, like bringing a meal and prayer. But those on-ramps for people that are a little lower hanging fruit. We might even say it's harder to not do them. Like if I told my kids, clean your room, they argue with me for 20 minutes about cleaning the room, and I say, in the 20 minutes you've argued with me, you could have spent 15 minutes of that cleaning your room and had 5 free extra minutes. It would have just been easier for you to do it, right? Kind of thing. So let's provide those super easy, low-hanging fruit opportunities, all the way down to the familial, the opening of our home, the integration of families. That's more commitment of time and energy and resources. Not everyone's there yet, or not everyone needs to be there necessarily. So let's provide tiered opportunities that allow people to on-ramp where they are and to be the best versions of the ears or eyes or hands or feet that they can be. That's part of the reason why we use the incarnation language, because the moving towards, the application of moving towards is as endless and unique and creative as each individual person in your church. The stories that you've probably heard, that we hear. I had a guy last week at a church wherever I was, don't even remember, and he said, my wife and I own an equestrian center where kids come and we teach them how to ride horses. Is there something that I can do with that? And we said, well, equine therapy. Yeah, we do equine therapy. Who do I need to talk to let them know this is available for kids that might benefit from that? Let's provide an environment in which people can ask, wow, what is my something? And can get really, really creative with that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jason. So Lynn, you have a very unique set of experiences working in child welfare, working with the government, state, national, local. We've talked a lot today about this idea of collaboration amongst businesses and local governments and state governments. Can you give us some concrete examples of where you've seen local governments, maybe state governments working with the church, working with businesses and other nonprofits?
Absolutely, and thank you for that question. The there are many states. I've been in most states in the country, and there are many states. Georgia is a great state doing a lot of integrative work. Texas is really working hard in their communities. You've got Houston, you've got Dallas, you've got Fort Worth. But what I found that you look for is not necessarily the program, because depending on who's running the program, sometimes depends on how good it is. What I look for is who integrates well, who works with church, nonprofits, business, who pushes the relationship piece. Some of the ideas where I've seen really good work, Care Portal is a really good program that works with state, with churches, government, businesses, and the community. And I also look to see who has the young adult's voice, the kid's voice, or the foster parent voice, or the adoptive parent voice. It can't be doing for people, it has to be doing with people. So I look for that. Care Portal's one, Dream Centers are another that do really good work. Wendy's Wonderful Kids, the Dave Thomas Foundation, when we're looking at someone who takes on the tough kids, they are successful in that field. So they're, depending on the state and depending on the program, if it's got those pieces of relationship, I usually see success.
Very good. Thank you. So Lesli, you are on the ground doing this, and you have been doing this for a while. So what are some specific activities that you see North Point doing that you've done to engage vulnerable kids and families in your area?
So I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record because it's the underlying theme of this whole conference that you've had today, I think. So what we do in several different contexts is create community. The micro version that we've referred to here is a care community. In our case, we form those in a very child-centric way, and the people that we attach to those placements are expected to live out that relational pathway until that child's story reaches its natural ending, because we know that these kids have already suffered relational loss, and we don't want to contribute to that any further. So we make those relationships long-standing and trigger any changes in those care communities off of the end of a placement. So that would be the micro level. Also on the micro level, we do some little things behind the scenes to make life easier on the kiddos and the parents. One example for the churches that are in the room would be that when a new placement starts, we actually behind the scenes register those kids in the children's environment that they're going to participate in, so that the children's environment is prepared for them to come on the first Sunday that they're coming, have already assigned a specific small group leader, so that the family doesn't enter the church that day being treated like a visitor, and the child gets welcomed to their classroom as an expected guest, by name, hand-chosen, and sometimes shadowed with an extra body in the room. So that would be another version of micro. At kind of the mid-level, what we do to create community is we gather the adults in a couple of different ways, sometimes in training environments that are a little bit larger scale. And we host them well, just like you guys have hosted us well here today. Nice food, nice snacks, all the good things. And then we also do something that's like a support group, although we call it a connection group. It's a way of gathering families, sometimes virtually, sometimes in person, depending on what is working best for the families and the staff person on my team. But those are often slightly content driven, meaning there will be a little bit of material that drives the conversation that day. And then the families get to spend time together with others who are like-minded and experiencing the hard place that they might be finding themselves in, and they get a training certificate for the time that they spend together. And all these parents need continuing education hours, so we try to navigate those environments in a way that's enriching to them in more than one way. And then the macro version would be just fun stuff that we do, and that usually includes all the family members and all the ministry participants and their family members. So right now, the planning is underway for 6 different pool parties across Metro Atlanta this summer. We rent out really great pools that have slides and lazy rivers, and it's really not hard to produce those events. The people come in droves to the privately rented pool on a Sunday evening, where they eat pizza, maybe get a popsicle, fruit juice or whatever, and spend time with their family and other families that are like theirs. We kind of do a big throwdown at Christmas time as well in that macro way. So those are just some of the examples. Was that what you were looking for?
That is wonderful.
Yeah.
Just great ideas that we can start taking back. into our own churches and different communities and begin to implement. I want to touch, Andy, on this idea. So Lesli mentioned care communities. We've heard that several times today, of care communities, this idea of surrounding families and providing things. Can you tell us a little bit more about what are care communities, what are roles within those care communities, and kind of how they function? You guys do a great job of training people to put together care communities. Can you just tell us a little bit about how would one of those things work and what's it look like?
A care community is a team of individuals that come alongside a family in a window of transition or change, and they do it for the sake of the children that are there. Just stepping above that, when a care community is at work, and you guys have this in your literature, about 90% of the time, a foster family specifically will keep going in the effort of foster care. A child won't experience that displacement from a home because the body of Christ stepped in. It's a big deal. On the other side of that, foster families quit about half the time by year one if they don't have people with them. So, to Leslie's point, care communities do various things, but the one thing they all do is they provide relationship. They provide understanding, they provide community. And that doesn't come through someone showing up and saying, "Hi, I'm here to give you community." But it does come through meal making, it does come through yard work, it certainly does come through transportation, getting a child from point A to point B. It comes through mentoring, it comes through tutoring, it comes from offering some form of respite care or overnight care, it comes through babysitting, and it comes through a dedicated team leader who's looking at the needs of this family and says, my job on this care community is to make sure that this, generally a foster mom, has her needs met, because oftentimes foster parents are pioneers, and they're gonna go get it done on their own until they can't. And that moment when they can't is one where they'll quit if they don't have people with them. So to have an advocate amongst them who's actually saying every week, no, tell me what you really need, and we're gonna get those needs met, that makes a huge difference. So that's what a care community looks like, and man, they make a huge difference.
And we've seen it already. We've seen care communities start surrounding families and the big difference that it makes. And it is something that churches need help walking through, we've generally seen, in terms of training and scheduling and just that idea of there being a team lead that interfaces with the family so the family doesn't get overwhelmed.
And I think that a lot of times we look at that sort of community and say, well, isn't community fundamentally an organic thing? And yes, it becomes organic, and it continues past the time of roles and structure and platforms and systems. But a lot of times to create relationship, something has to be engineered. And a mistake that sometimes churches will make is they'll say, well, I don't, we already do that. And my question is, do you? And do you after the first month? And do you at the 6th month? And do you at month 18? Because that sort of engineered commitment that comes out of that makes a huge difference for those children.
Such an important concept. So Jason, we've heard a lot. We've heard care communities now. We've heard ideas that Lesli have. We've heard this concept about working within the community. If I'm sitting in the audience and I'm a pastor or someone for a church right now, I'm shaking my head, and my question is, where do I even start? What are those first principles and first activities that I undertake?
Yeah, so there's no prescription for this. There's no set of ingredients. It's not do one and then add another one and you'll get 2. For some churches, 1 + 1 = 17. So you know the culture and the rhythms of your church best, and you likely can draw to mind, you're likely here in part because you can draw to mind very quickly someone in your church that is doing this, and maybe they're here with you. And so our answer to that question of what do we do first is often in response to the question, what do we need to do to start a ministry? And we usually answer that question with, well, before you start a ministry, let's start talking about building community. And we've heard the idea of community here. And one of the questions that then ensues is this question of, when was the last time people in your church who are fostering or adopting, have fostered or adopted, and maybe even go a step further, are considering fostering or adopting have ever been invited to a space just for them. They've all been in a room or a backyard, just them. And oftentimes the answer to that question is, well, when was the last time? That would be never. And we go, great, let's start there. And for some churches, that's going to be easier than other churches. For some churches, it's going to be a matter of we're going to make a few announcements on stage, and hey, if this is who you are, then we want to know who you are, and we want to start connecting you with other people that are like you. And for other churches, maybe it's larger, and it's more difficult to get a message out to the entire church. And so there's no script for this other than you know the rhythms and the communication portals and the way to get word out to people in your church better than anybody. And I would start there. Start to build community among those people, and what will naturally and inevitably arise from that community is ministry. You'll begin to learn the needs of the people. You'll begin to understand where they are, and then you'll have an opportunity to invite others to care for them, to wrap around and to begin to support them. Ministry always, in my opinion, naturally and inevitably evolves from community. And so let's connect them together. Some might say, well, what if we only have 2 families in our church? I'd say, well, there's no only in any of this, right? You have 2 families in your church. That's unbelievably fantastic, right? Maybe there's another church down the road that has 1, and another one across town that has 2, and another one across town that has 3. Are you saying that we all need to start all of our own things for 1 or 2 or 3 families? I'd say maybe not. Maybe you get together and say, together we've got pretty strong critical mass. What does it look like for us together to share the support and the structure of how we can care for these families together as churches in our community? And what a really awesome way to start that sense of integration among each other and a shared sense of we're in this together. That would be great. Start with community is always our answer first.
Keeps coming back to that common theme, doesn't it?
Yes.
That's what we've seen at Chestnut Mountain Ranch for years, is we put this structured, loving, caring community around families. It just works.
And so let me say this. The community, what does that mean? I think we might have different terms for this, but you can think of it through these lenses. We say words like community or other words that where you go, that sounds really nice. What does that actually mean? On the ground level, and I have found, and maybe there's different words up here, there's a few categories of people, let's say in a foster family's life. There's going to be people who get them, like we have shared experiences. I know what it feels like to stand in a courtroom next to a biological parent in front of a judge. Most people in your church don't know how that feels. I know what it feels, shared experiences. We get each other. Then there's going to be people who love you, but they might not get you. Like, I'll bring you a meal every day of the week, but I don't understand a lot of the things that you've gone through. And then there's going to be people that, ignore you and don't make eye contact with you because they think if I make eye contact with them, then, I'm going to suddenly become a foster parent, and I'm terrified of that. I might catch it, yeah. Right? But generally, there's people that get you and love you, and I think those are 2 places of community that we need. We need a room of people that we don't have to explain ourselves to, and that's the get. And then what Lesli and Andy have been talking about is this wrapping around with people who just love you, and they're in the room with you, and they're not leaving.
Very good clarification. Thank you. So, Lynn, you've interacted with child welfare professionals all over the nation. There is a lot of data out there about how children are impacted by the turnover and the vacancies in child welfare professionals, especially with these frontline caseworkers. Can you tell us a little bit about that data and what churches might be able to do to impact that part of the problem?
One of the things that we don't say often enough is how valuable those caseworkers are. They're on the front lines. They get their degrees in social work or counseling, and then they come into their first really good job that they're real excited to change the world, and they get called out to a home, and they're screaming, and police come, and they end up having to yank a child from a parent's arms and take them someplace to keep them safe. And there's a lot of trauma, secondary trauma for that caseworker. And yes, there's turnover. What I'm hearing throughout the country today is almost every commissioner or secretary has said they don't know what to do about their workforce. They're losing people in droves. One thing that's going on today is there are a large group, actually all of us at this, on the chairs and couches, we are pulling together in October to have what we call Hospitality Month. And we are going to honor throughout the United States our frontline workers. We don't ever want to forget that they are first responders. And they get lost in that sometimes. But so we are going to honor foster parents, we're going to honor frontline caseworkers, and that's the month of October. For some, they can't do it in October, so we started in March, and people are honoring throughout the country, and this is the first year, so I'm sure it won't be in every single state, but we're gonna start by honoring our caseworkers for the work they do, because they do save lives, and that makes a really big difference. So I think that's first. We also have to stop the narrative of the caseworkers versus the foster parents and the adoptive parents versus caseworkers. We need to pull together, and it needs to be done on all sides, and it needs to be done in schools of social work, counseling, and others, that we need to create the team and the community that you're all talking about, or we won't have success with the kids.
So important. We've heard examples even here today. It's just so important. I've heard these folks being described as the forgotten first responders, because they go in very often. In some counties in West Virginia, they go in by themselves to remove children. There's not law enforcement with them.
Yeah, we did.
And what a difficult place. And they're not.
One more thought on that, what you just said. During the COVID response, I was responsible for getting the PPE, all the protective gear out to all the first responders. Caseworkers and those that go into the house the first time, it was not there. We had to call governors and say, you need to do something to make these people first responders so we can get them what they need to be safe walking into the houses. It was interesting to see, the governor's offices just had no idea. They didn't even think about, oh, people aren't going to go into homes when there's a crisis if we don't get them the stuff. But they also had to change their own rules and regulations in order to make that happen.
Wow, such important work. So Lesli, we're going to try to make up a little time here, so you're going to be our last question. I know this was a very quick panel. We talk a lot about the data and the numbers, but ultimately it comes down to this: faces, not cases. Yeah. Can you share a story with us in terms of what you've seen and the impact on vulnerable kids and families at North Point?
I can, and I'm especially excited to share this story right now because it's emerging. There's a young man, he's now 15, who's been in our ministry since he was age 7. He has been in multiple placements, sometimes therapeutic placements, rebounds often to the original foster mom in our church, but his care community has traveled with him through all of those placement changes to all of the locations implied in that. So the relationships of these people who were on the surface secondary in his story have become primary in creating a sustaining cycle of relationship for him. And he was baptized in 2018. He's been a participant in all of our children's environments except the toddler program. He has consistently been brought to church throughout all these years, even when he wasn't placed with a family that went to our church. These care community members would still go get him and make sure that he could go to church where he was familiar much of the time. And I don't know if you kind of picked up on this, but adoption of teenagers is rare, but he'll be adopted on June 6th. After all of these years in care, when all hope seemed gone, he is achieving family, and all of the people who've been in his care communities, on his case at the church, on his case at DFACS are all being invited to the adoption party. And so if you would have asked me 3 years ago about Preston's story, I would have just been sad because it was as if nothing was ever going to happen for him. And now at the age of 15, he's got a permanent family, but he's also retained all of these other relationships over time. And just watching his story and others has caused me to come up with this little tagline that I think kind of captures my heart for this whole area, which is these children deserve to lose the least and keep the most relationally at every intersection on their journey. And it's our job as Christ followers, as professionals, as pastors, as people, to make sure that we do that for them. They've already lost something very precious in the intervention that happened, and we don't need to be a part of that. We need to be a part of the healing mission and the restorative mission and the relationships last forever mission, just like Jason has done for his girls, just like Andy has done for his, just like Lynn is doing right now for these young adults. People don't quit other people. That's not normal. So let's not do that.
I love it. What a great story to end this very short panel on. I'm just so thankful for all of you all being here today. This has been so meaningful. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your insight.